Welcome to Dark Trace. Tonight we board a train that promises luxury but delivers silence. The Gare de Lyon is loud with steam and farewells, but inside the Venetian Express the air is already holding its breath. We are traveling with Inspector Emil Valmont, a man who believes he is on holiday, and a passenger who believes he is being hunted. The snow is falling, the tracks are frozen, and before we reach the Italian border, a locked door will open onto nothing at all. Before the whistle blows, a quick reminder. These stories exist because of our listeners. If you want to support the channel and help us keep the lights on in the writing room, you can join us on Patreon for early access and exclusive episodes, or leave a tip on Buy Me a Coffee. Every bit helps us keep the mystery alive. Links are in the description. Now pull your coat tighter. The conductor is checking tickets and the steam is rising. It was a night made for secrets. The fog had rolled in from the Seine, thick and yellow, turning the great iron arches of the Gare de Lyon into the ribs of some vast, sleeping beast. Steam hissed from the undercarriages of the trains, wrapping the platform in a cold, damp veil that made every passenger look like a ghost before they had even departed. I stood by the entrance of the wagon-lit, stamping my feet against the bitter Parisian chill. Beside me, Inspector Emil Valmont was engaged in his favorite pastime, criticizing the weather as though it were a personal insult to his dignity. "You observe, my friend," he murmured, adjusting his silk scarf with precise, gloved fingers. "The cold is disorganized. It invades without strategy. I prefer a climate that respects boundaries." "We are going to Venice, Valmont," I said, trying to be cheerful. "It will be damp there, too." "But it will be Italian damp," Valmont countered. "That is an entirely different matter. Italian damp has history. This is merely wet." He turned his gaze to the train itself. The Venetian Express was a masterpiece of blue steel and gold lettering, a rolling palace designed to carry the elite of Europe across the Alps in a cocoon of velvet and champagne. It was a machine built for pleasure, yet tonight it felt heavy. The porters moved luggage with hushed urgency. The passengers boarding the first-class carriages did not smile. They hurried, heads down, clutching collars and furs. "It is quiet," Valmont noted softly. "Too quiet for a holiday train." "It's the snow," I suggested. "The lines are reported to be heavy near the border." "Perhaps," said Valmont. His eyes, sharp as black glass, darted down the platform. "Or perhaps the passengers know that a train is a dangerous thing. It is a prison that moves. Once the doors lock, we are all trapped in the same box until morning." As if to prove his point, a commotion broke out near the barrier. A man was pushing his way through the crowd, trailed by a porter struggling with 3 massive leather trunks. The man was dressed in a coat that cost more than my annual pension, with a fur collar turned up high to hide his face. But it was his movement that caught the eye. He did not walk. He darted, jerking his head left and right, scanning the steam as if expecting a bullet to emerge from it. He stopped directly in front of the conductor of our carriage, a tall, imposing man in a pristine uniform. "Number 7, the passenger snapped. His voice was high, brittle with strain. I telephoned ahead. "Coupe number 7. And I want the connecting door locked. Bolted. Do you understand?" "Monsieur Vane," the conductor replied smoothly, checking his clipboard. "We have prepared everything. You are quite safe." "Safe?" The man, Elias Vane, laughed, a sharp, ugly sound that made Valmont stiffen. "Nobody is safe in a crowd, you fool. I want to know who is in number 8 and number 6. If it is anyone tall, anyone with a scar, anyone who looks like they are waiting." "Monsieur," the conductor interrupted firmly, "we do not discuss other passengers, please. Board. We depart in 4 minutes." Vane grabbed the conductor's arm. His hands, I noticed, were trembling violently, the knuckles white against the dark wool of the conductor's sleeve. "If anyone asks for me," Vane hissed, leaning in close. I am not here. I never boarded. Tell them the seat is empty. He released his grip and scrambled up the metal steps, vanishing into the corridor like a rat seeking a hole. Valmont watched him go, his head tilted to one side. Elias Vane, he murmured. The collector. The man who buys things that should not be sold. You know him? I asked. I know of him, Valmont corrected. He is a man who has made many enemies and enough money to buy them off. Usually. He looked terrified, I said. He looked, Valmont said gravely, like a man who has realized that money cannot buy a lock strong enough to keep out his past. A whistle blew, sharp and lonely, cutting through the fog. The conductor signaled. The great pistons of the engine began to churn, sending a fresh cloud of white smoke billowing into the vaulted roof. Come, Valmont said, placing a hand on my shoulder. Let us board. I intended to sleep all the way to Lausanne, but I fear Mr. Vane has brought his ghost with him, and ghosts, as we know, do not pay for tickets. We stepped up into the carriage. Behind us, the heavy metal door swung shut with a final, decisive clang, sealing us inside. The train lurched. The wheels groaned against the frozen iron, and slowly, rhythmically, we began to move into the dark. The dining car of the Venetian Express was a deception. With its mahogany panels, Lalique glass lamps, and starched white linen, it tried to convince us that we were sitting in a Parisian restaurant rather than hurtling through the frozen dark at 60 miles an hour. But the vibration gave it away. The crystal wine glasses shivered on the tables, a constant faint singing that reminded everyone that the ground beneath us was not solid. Valmont and I sat at a small table near the window. Outside, there was nothing but absolute blackness, occasionally broken by the white blur of a snow-covered signal post whipping past. Observe the zoo, my friend, Valmont murmured, breaking a bread roll with surgical precision. Feeding time is always instructive. I looked around. The carriage was half full, a collection of strangers bound by the intimacy of travel. Who interest you? I asked. Everyone, Valmont replied, but specifically those three. He tilted his head almost imperceptibly. At the far end sat a massive man with a thick neck and a face flushed red from wine. He was eating a steak with an energy that bordered on violence, sawing at the meat as if he held a grudge against it. Mr. Arthur Grendel, Valmont whispered. Industrial steel. A man used to crushing things. Observe how he holds the knife. He does not cut. He severs. To our left sat a woman of striking beauty, though her face was pale beneath the powder. She wore a dress of dark green velvet and a necklace of diamonds that caught the lamplight. She was not eating. She was staring at her reflection in the darkened window. Isabella Calvi, I recognized her. The soprano. I heard her at La Scala 2 years ago. Precisely, said Valmont, but tonight she is not singing. She is waiting. Look at her left hand, the way it keeps touching the clasp of her necklace. A nervous habit, or perhaps she fears it will be snatched away. And then there was the third figure. A man sitting alone, 2 tables away. He was thin, gray-haired, with spectacles that magnified his eyes into owl-like circles. He had not ordered wine, only mineral water. He sat with absolute stillness, his hands folded on the tablecloth like a sleeping mantis. Dr. Eris Thorne, Valmont noted, a surgeon who no longer operates. They say his hands began to shake, and yet, look at them now. Stone still. The atmosphere in the car was hushed. The conversation low and polite, until the doors slid open. Elias Vane entered. He had changed from his travel coat into a dinner suit that hung loosely on his frame. He did not wait to be seated. He walked straight to a table in the center of the car, his eyes darting frantically from face to face. He looked like a man who had walked into a room full of tigers. A waiter approached, holding a bottle of Bordeaux. Monsieur. Vane flinched so violently that his elbow struck the wine glass sitting before him. It swept off the table and shattered on the floor, a sharp, shocking crash that silenced the entire carriage. For a second, nobody moved. The industrialist stopped chewing. The opera diva turned her head. The silent doctor merely blinked behind his thick lenses. Vane did not apologize. He stared down at the red stains spreading on the carpet, looking for a moment as if he thought it was blood. Then he looked up, and his gaze swept the room again. It was a look of naked, aggressive terror. "I will not pay for that," Vane snapped, his voice too loud in the quiet car. It was placed too close to the edge. "It is your fault." "Of course, monsieur," the waiter murmured, bowing low to hide his disdain. "I will bring a fresh cloth." Vane sat down, but he did not relax. He ordered whiskey, a double, and drank it in one long swallow. "He is unraveling," I whispered to Valmont. "The man is paranoid." "Paranoid?" Valmont's eyes narrowed. "Perhaps. But notice where he looks, Hastings. Watch him carefully." I watched. Vane was glaring at the industrialist, then at the doctor. But Valmont was right. He wasn't looking at their eyes. "He is looking at their hands," I realized. "Exactly," Valmont said softly. "He does not care about their faces. Faces can lie. Faces can wear masks. But he is searching for a specific pair of hands. Hands that have perhaps threatened him before. Hands that he knows are capable of closing around a throat." Vane poured himself a second drink. His own hands were shaking so badly the bottle clicked against the glass. He downed it, then stood up abruptly. He threw a crumpled banknote onto the table, far too much for the drink, and marched out of the dining car without looking back, swaying slightly with the motion of the train. As the door closed behind him, the tension in the room broke, but the unease remained. The industrialist grunted and returned to his steak. The diva signaled for the check. The doctor took a sip of water. "He is running," Valmont said, finishing his coffee. "But on a train there is nowhere to run. He has merely returned to his cage." "Do you think he is in real danger?" I asked. Valmont looked out at the black window, where the snow was now streaking past in horizontal lines of white fire. "Tonight, Hastings, we are crossing the Alps," he said quietly. "In the mountains, the law is distant and the shadows are long. Mr. Vane believes a wolf is on the train, and looking at this company," he glanced at the silent doctor and the brutal industrialist, "I am not certain he is wrong." Valmont stood up and adjusted his jacket. "Come, let us return to the corridor. I have a feeling the night will not be as quiet as the conductor promised." Sleep, on a train like this, is a negotiation between the body and the machine. The wheels hammer out a rhythm, click-me-clack, click-clack, that is supposed to be hypnotic, a mechanical lullaby designed to rock the wealthy into oblivion. But that night, the rhythm felt frantic. As the train began its ascent into the Alps, the engine labored, the couplings groaned, and the wind outside shrieked against the glass like a living thing trying to claw its way in. I lay in my bunk in Coupe No. 9, staring at the polished mahogany ceiling. In the lower bunk, Valmont was breathing with infuriating regularity, asleep the moment his head touched the pillow. A clear conscience, or perhaps just a man who trusts that the universe will pause its crimes until he has had his 8 hours. I was not so lucky. The image of Elias Vane's trembling hands in the dining car would not leave me. At 2 a.m., I gave up the fight. I put on my dressing gown, found my cigarette case, and slid open the door to the corridor. The hallway of the sleeping car was a long, narrow tunnel of dim yellow light. The windows were black mirrors reflecting only the empty stretch of carpet and the closed doors of the compartments. It was cold here. A draft was seeping in from the gangways, smelling of snow and coal dust. I was not the only one awake. At the far end of the corridor, near the conductor's station, a figure was seated on a small folding stool. The conductor, The same tall man from the platform was awake, reading a newspaper by the light of a small lamp. He looked up as I stepped out, nodded once, professional and alert, then returned to his reading. I walked to the window midway down the car to light my cigarette. The train was passing through a tunnel. The roar was deafening, drowning out thought. Then, the door to Coupe No. 7 opened. Elias Vane stepped out, or rather, he half fell out, clutching the door frame. He was still in his dinner suit, though his tie was undone and his hair wild. He looked down the corridor, first toward the conductor, then toward me. His eyes were wide, glassy, unseeing. He didn't seem to recognize either of us. He looked like a man who had walked to the edge of a cliff and was trying to decide whether to step back or jump. He muttered something, I couldn't hear what, over the noise of the train, and then turned back inside. And then came the sound that would haunt the rest of the investigation. I watched him close the door. I heard the latch click, and then, distinct and deliberate, I heard the sound of the key turning in the lock. Once. A pause, then a second turn. The deadbolt sliding home. Click. Clack. Elias Vane had locked himself in. He was safe. The train burst out of the tunnel and the noise dropped away, replaced by the muffled hush of falling snow. I smoked in silence, watching the smoke curl against the cold glass. The conductor turned a page of his newspaper. The world was still. And then, it happened. From inside Coupe No. 7 there was a sound. It was not a scream. It was not a gunshot. It was a dull, heavy thud. It sounded like a heavy suitcase falling from a rack, or a body hitting the floor. I froze. The cigarette burned my fingers. I looked down the hall at the conductor. He had lowered his paper. He was looking at door No. 7, his head cocked to the side. "Did you hear that?" I called out softly. The conductor hesitated, then stood up and walked slowly toward Vane's door. He paused outside, listening. Silence. Absolute, heavy silence. "Monsieur Vane?" the conductor called, tapping lightly on the wood. No answer. "It was probably luggage, sir," the conductor said to me, though his voice lacked conviction. The train lurched when we exited the tunnel. Things shift. "He looked unwell," I said, stepping closer. "Perhaps we should check." The conductor frowned. "He gave strict orders, monsieur. Do not disturb me for any reason. If I wake him because his suitcase fell, he will have my job." He waited another moment, ear pressed to the panel. Nothing stirred inside. No groan, no movement, no footsteps. "He is sleeping," the conductor decided, adjusting his cap. If he needed help, he would ring the bell. I looked at the door. Solid oak. Locked from the inside. A fortress. "I suppose you are right," I said, but the feeling of dread in my stomach had turned into a cold knot. I crushed my cigarette into the wall ashtray and returned to my own coupe. I climbed back into bed, but sleep was impossible now. I lay in the dark, listening to the wheels, waiting for a second sound that never came. Coupe No. 7 remained silent, but as the train climbed higher into the frozen night, I could not shake the feeling that the silence behind that daughter was not the silence of sleep. It was the silence of an empty room. Morning on the Alps does not break. It explodes. The sun rose over the peaks in a blinding shatter of white and gold, reflecting off the glaciers with a brilliance that hurt the eyes. Inside the train, the world had returned to the civilized rituals of daylight. The smell of fresh coffee and toasted bread drifted from the galley, and the rhythmic click-clack of the wheels sounded less like a threat and more like a heartbeat. But in the corridor of the sleeping car, the shadows had not quite lifted. I found Valmont already dressed, standing by the window in our coupe, shaving with a straight razor. The train swayed, but his hand remained as steady as a statue's. "You look terrible, my friend," he remarked, wiping soap from his chin. "The night did not treat you kindly?" "I didn't sleep," I admitted, rubbing my eyes. I kept waiting for Vane to make a sound. Did you hear anything? I heard the wind, Valmont said. I heard the engine, and I heard you tossing in your bunk like a man wrestling a bear. Beyond that, nothing. That's just it, I said. Nothing. After that thud, absolute silence. Not a cough, not a footstep. Valmont put away his razor. Silence is a heavy thing, Hastings. Sometimes it is simply peace. Sometimes it is a lid screwed down tight. We stepped out into the corridor. It was 8 a.m. The train was slowing down, the brakes grinding as we navigated the twisting descent toward the Italian border. The conductor, a fresh one, the night shift having ended, was moving down the line with a silver tray of pastries. He stopped at Coupe No. 7. He knocked. Monsieur Vane, breakfast? There was no answer. The conductor waited, then knocked again, louder this time. Monsieur? We are approaching Domodossola. The border police will require your passport in 20 minutes. Still. Silence. I stepped forward. The knot in my stomach tightened. He locked the door last night, I told the conductor. I heard him turn the bolt twice. The conductor frowned, his professional mask slipping slightly. He is perhaps a heavy sleeper. These rich men, they take powders, pills. He rattled the handle. Locked, solid. Try your key, Valmont suggested gently, stepping up behind me. The conductor sighed, fished a master key from his vest pocket and slid it into the lock. He turned it, or rather, he tried to. The key turned halfway and stopped with a metallic clunk. The conductor's face paled. I cannot, he muttered. The key, it is blocked. Because his key is still in the lock from the inside, Valmont said. His voice had lost its morning lightness. It was now low and sharp. And the deadbolt is engaged. Monsieur Vane, the conductor shouted, pounding on the wood with his fist. Open the door. Is there a medical emergency? The only reply was the whistle of the train, echoing off the canyon walls outside. Break it, Valmont ordered. Monsieur, I cannot. Simply. If he is sick, he needs help, Valmont snapped. If he is not sick, he will forgive us. Break it. The conductor looked at Valmont's eyes and saw an authority that outranked his own. He nodded, hurried to the end of the car, and returned with a heavy steel pry bar painted red. The emergency tool. He wedged the flat end between the door and the frame, right by the lock. He heaved. The wood groaned. He heaved again. With a splintering crack, the jamb gave way. The metal bolt tore through the wood and the door swung inward. A blast of cold air hit us instantly. I expected to see a body. I expected blood on the carpet. A man clutching his chest. A tragedy of the heart or the knife. I saw nothing. The coupe was empty. We crowded into the doorway, staring. The bed was unmade, the sheets twisted and tangled as though someone had slept in them violently. A pillow was on the floor, but Elias Vane was gone. The bathroom, I whispered. The conductor pushed open the small door to the lavatory compartment, empty. A toothbrush sat dry in a glass. A towel hung untouched. Valmont stepped into the room. He moved slowly, his eyes sweeping every inch of the space. The window, the conductor gasped. He must have. Valmont walked to the window. It was shut. Not just shut. It was sealed with a rim of thick white ice along the bottom edge. Valmont pressed his hand against the glass. He tried to lift the latch. It was frozen solid. No, Valmont said softly. This window has not been opened for hours. If he had opened it, the ice would be broken and the snow would be inside. Look at the sill. It is dry. But the door was locked, I stammered. From the inside, the key is still there. I looked. It was true. The brass key protruded from the inner lock, turned to the horizontal position. He could not have left through the door, Valmont murmured. He could not have left through the window. There are no trapdoors in a train, and the ventilation shaft. He pointed to a small grill near the ceiling, barely 6 inches wide. Is fit only for a mouse. The conductor took off his cap, wiping sweat from his forehead. He is gone. He has evaporated. Men do not evaporate, Valmont said. He knelt by the bed. He peered under it. Only a pair of slippers and a layer of dust. He stood up and looked around the small, luxurious cage. A man had entered. He had locked the door. He had screamed without a voice. And then, he had ceased to exist. Valmont turned to us. His face was grave, but in his dark eyes a dangerous fire had been lit. "Close the door," he commanded. "Let no one enter. We have a problem, gentlemen. Physics has been violated. And when the laws of nature are broken, it is usually to hide a very human crime." "But where is he?" I asked, my voice rising. "There is nowhere he could be." Valmont looked at the empty bed, then at the frozen window, and finally at the locked door we had just destroyed. "That," said Inspector Valmont, "is the only question that matters. The man is gone. But his ghost must still be on this train." The train continued to rattle downward through the pass, indifferent to the fact that it was now carrying a mystery instead of a passenger. The conductor stood in the doorway of Coupe No. 7, wringing his cap in his hands, his face the color of old parchment. "I must stop the train," he stammered. "We must search the tracks. Perhaps he fell. Perhaps—" "Do not stop the train," Valmont ordered without looking up from the floor. "If he fell, he is dead, and the snow has already buried him. If he did not fall, stopping gives him exactly what he wants: chaos." Valmont was on his hands and knees, moving across the carpet with the intensity of a bloodhound. He gestured for me to close the ruined door as best I could. "Stand there, Hastings. Do not touch anything. Just breathe." "Breathe?" I asked. "It smells of stale air and panic." "Deeper," Valmont commanded. "Beneath the panic. What do you smell?" I inhaled. There was the metallic tang of the heating pipes, the faint smell of the conductor's hair oil, and something else, something sweet, cloying, and faintly medicinal. "It smells like spirits," I suggested. "Cleaning fluid?" "Ether," Valmont corrected, "or chloroform, a volatile anesthetic. See here." He pointed to a darkened patch on the carpet near the bed. It was damp to the touch. Valmont leaned down, his nose almost brushing the fibers. "He did not spill his drink," Valmont murmured. "This was spilled for him. A rag, perhaps, pressed against a face. It evaporates quickly, but the wool of the carpet remembers." "But Vane was awake," I argued. "I heard him lock the door. I heard the bolt." "You heard a sound that signified locking," Valmont said cryptically. He moved to the small table by the window. On the table lay a heavy crystal ashtray. Inside it rested a single cigar. It had been lit, smoked perhaps a quarter of the way down, and then crushed out with violent force. The ash was scattered across the glass surface like gray snow. "Ash," Valmont said, picking up the stub with his tweezers. "A Monte Cristo. Heavy, dark tobacco." "Vane was smoking to calm his nerves," I said. Valmont held the cigar up to the light. "Recall the dining car, Hastings. Recall Mr. Vane's hands. They were shaking. He spilled his wine. He could barely hold his fork. Now look at this cigar. The burn is even. The ash is long. To smoke a cigar like this requires patience, steadiness, and—" He paused, sniffing the unburnt end of the cigar. "Vane's teeth were white, Hastings. I observed them when he snarled at the waiter. A man who smokes Monte Cristos leaves stains. This cigar was not smoked by Elias Vane." "Then who?" "Someone who waited," Valmont whispered. "Someone who sat in this room in the dark, watching the door." He stood up, his eyes scanning the room for the third anomaly. He looked at the bed, the luggage rack, the frozen window, then, His gaze drifted upward to the small ventilation grill near the ceiling, a brass grate meant to circulate air. "Hastings, give me a leg up." "Valmont, really, at your age, my age is immaterial when my curiosity is inflamed." "Lift." I braced my hands, and Valmont stepped onto the edge of the bed, boosting himself up toward the ceiling. He pulled a small magnifying glass from his pocket. "Ah," he breathed, "the devil is in the details." He reached out with his tweezers again. From the corner of the brass grill, caught on a jagged piece of metal screw, he pulled a tiny, almost invisible fragment of fabric. He hopped down lightly and held it out against his white palm. It was a shred of velvet. Deep, blood red. "Red velvet," I said, frowning. "The upholstery?" "The upholstery is blue," Valmont said. "The curtains are gold. Vane's suit was black." "Who wears red velvet?" I asked. "Not a who," Valmont said, his eyes darkening. "A what?" "This is not clothing, Hastings. It is too thick. It is the lining of a case. Or a bag." He placed the fragment carefully into a small glass envelope from his pocket. "We have a cigar smoked by a calm man in a room occupied by a terrified one. We have a wet spot that smells of a hospital. We have a piece of red velvet caught near the ceiling as if something brushed against it high up. And we have a locked door," I reminded him. "And no Vane." "The door is a mechanism," Valmont dismissed. "Mechanisms can be tricked. But the smell tells me that Mr. Vane did not leave this room under his own power. And the cigar tells me he was not alone." He turned to the conductor, who was still hovering in the hallway. "Monsieur," Valmont said sharply, "the lady in Coupe No. 8, the famous soprano. Is she awake?" "Madame Calvi? I believe she ordered tea, but—" "Excellent." Valmont adjusted his tie. We are going to pay her a visit. Because unless I am very much mistaken, the wall between Coupe 7 and Coupe 8 is thinner than we think." "But why her?" I asked. "Because," Valmont said, staring at the red thread in the vial, "opera singers travel with many costumes, and they are experts at controlling their breath, even when the air smells of ether." Before we step into the next compartment to confront the diva, a brief word. If you are enjoying this investigation and want to see the clues before Valmont reveals them, consider joining our Patreon. You'll get access to the full case notes, early episodes, and the chance to vote on which mystery we solve next. You can also support the show with a one-time tip on Buy Me a Coffee. Your support is the coal that keeps this engine running. Now, let us see what the lady in green has to say about the man who vanished next door. The distance between Coupe No. 7 and Coupe No. 8 was only a few inches of steel and wood paneling, yet stepping from one to the other felt like crossing a border between two different worlds. We left a room that smelled of panic and vanished men, and entered a sanctuary of aggressive glamour. Isabella Calvi answered Valmont's knock after a long delay. When the door slid open, she stood framed in the aperture, wrapped in a dressing gown of emerald silk that trailed on the floor. Her dark hair was pinned up, but loosely, as if she had arranged it in haste. Her face was a mask of composed irritation, but her eyes, large, dark, and wet, told a different story. "Inspector," she said, her voice a low, melodic thrum. "Is this an official visit? I was under the impression that the border police wore uniforms." "The border police are blunt instruments, madame," Valmont said, bowing slightly. "I am a scalpel. May we come in?" She hesitated, glancing into the corridor where the conductor was still guarding the ruins of Vane's door. Then, with a sigh of velvet resignation, she stepped back. The first thing that hit me was the cold. The compartment was freezing. It was significantly colder than the corridor, colder even than my own room. The heating pipes hissed in the corner, fighting a losing battle against a draft that seemed to linger in the curtains. The second thing was the smell. It was overwhelming. A heavy floral wall of scent, tuberose, jasmine, and musk. It was the kind of perfume meant for the stage, designed to reach the back row of an opera house. Here, in a 6x8 cabin, it was suffocating. "You keep your room crisp, madame," Valmont remarked, rubbing his gloved hands together. "My throat," Isabella said, touching her neck. "Central heating dries the vocal cords. I require fresh air." "You opened the window?" I asked, looking at the frosted glass. It was shut now. "For a moment," she said. "To breathe." Valmont moved into the room, his nose twitching like a rabbit's. He did not look at the window. He looked at the connecting door, the locked panel that separated her room from Vane's. "You slept well?" Valmont asked innocently. "Like the dead," she replied. "How fortunate." Valmont smiled, though his eyes remained hard. "Because the gentleman next door did not sleep at all. In fact, he seems to have spent the night engaged in a disappearing act." "You heard nothing?" Isabella walked to her vanity table and picked up a silver hairbrush. Her knuckles were white. "The train is noisy, Inspector. I take sleeping powders." "Ah," Valmont said. "Powders." And yet, he leaned closer to her, invading her personal space with a boldness that made me flinch. He took a deep breath, inhaling the cloud of tuberose that surrounded her. "Underneath the flowers, madame," Valmont whispered, "there is a ghost." She froze. "I do not understand." "I think you do," Valmont said softly. "I smell it. The sweet, chemical tang of ether. It is faint, buried under your expensive parfum de nuit. But it is there. It is on your curtains. It is in the cold air. Why did you really open the window, madame? Was it for your voice, or was it to flush out the fumes of an anesthetic?" The silver hairbrush clattered onto the table. Isabella Calvi sank onto the small velvet bench, her composure cracking like cheap glaze. He was screaming," she whispered, but without sound, just thumping, like a bird trapped in a box. "When?" Valmont demanded. "The tunnel," she said. "The long one. Before the snow started, I heard the door next door open, then voices, low, angry, then the thud." "You said the door opened," I interrupted. "Did you look out?" She looked at me, her eyes wide with a fear that seemed suddenly very young. I opened my door a crack, just an inch. "And what did you see?" "A man," she said, "standing outside Mr. Vane's door. He was turning the key." "Vane?" I asked. "No," she shook her head. "I saw his back. He wore a uniform, blue, gold buttons. The conductor." I looked at Valmont. "But the conductor was at the end of the hall," I said. "I saw him. He was reading the paper." "Are you certain it was the conductor?" Valmont pressed. "He wore the cap," Isabella insisted. "He locked the door from the outside. Then he put the key in his pocket and walked away toward the baggage car. I thought he was helping Mr. Vane with a lock." "I didn't know." "You saw a uniform," Valmont corrected. "You did not see a face." He turned away from her and walked to the connecting door. He ran his fingers along the seam. "So," he murmured, "we have a conductor who is in two places at once. We have a scream that was silenced by chemicals. And we have a witness who opened her window to let the poison out." He turned back to her. "Madame, one last question. The cold in this room. Did you open the window after the silence fell next door?" "Yes," she wept. "The smell. It was seeping through the cracks. It made me dizzy." Valmont nodded, satisfied. He took my arm. "Come, Hastings. We must leave Madame to her regrets." "Regrets?" I asked as we stepped back into the corridor. "She regrets," Valmont said grimly, "that she did not scream when she had the chance. But now we know something vital." "That the conductor is involved?" "No," Valmont said. that someone played the role of the conductor, and if they walked toward the baggage car, then that is where we shall find the rest of Mr. Vane. The train lurched again, heavier now, as if dragging a dead weight. Valmont looked down the length of the swaying corridor toward the dark, rattling door of the luggage van. "The show is over, Hastings," he said. "Now we go backstage." To reach the baggage car from the sleeping quarters, one must pass through the throat of the train. We stepped out of the velvet warmth of the corridor and into the vestibule between carriages. The noise here was a physical assault. The screech of iron on iron, the roar of the wind, and the terrifying clatter of the metal plates shifting beneath our feet. Valmont opened the heavy door leading to the baggage van. A blast of freezing air hit us, smelling of coal smoke and wet canvas. The train was slowing down now, the engine fighting against the drifts that were piling up on the tracks like white dunes. "It is a mausoleum," Valmont shouted over the din. "A graveyard for leather and silk." The baggage car was dimly lit by a single swaying bulb. It was a cavernous space, stacked high with the debris of the wealthy: steamer trunks, hat boxes, cases for violins and hunting rifles. It was cold here, with no heating to speak of, and shadows danced wildly on the walls with every lurch of the wheels. "Where do we look?" I asked, shivering. Vane brought 3 large trunks, Valmont said, his eyes scanning the piles. He was a man who believed in heavy protection. "Look for the initials EV." We moved through the aisles of luggage. The train groaned, slowing almost to a crawl. The snow was winning. "Here," I called out. Stacked in a corner, near the sliding loading doors, were 3 massive trunks of dark oxblood leather with brass fittings. They looked expensive, solid, and immovable. Valmont approached them. He knelt and inspected the locks. "Scratched," he noted. "Recently picked. Someone has been curious." He lifted the latch of the top trunk. It opened with a creak. I expected suits. I expected the wardrobe of a millionaire: silk shirts, dinner jackets, cashmere coats. Instead, I saw gray. Valmont reached in and pulled out a stack of newspapers: French, English, German. Beneath them lay 3 red clay bricks, wrapped in oilcloth to stop them from shifting. "Bricks?" I stared. He was traveling with bricks? Valmont opened the second trunk. More newspapers, more bricks, an old telephone directory. "It is a theater prop," Valmont murmured, his voice filled with a strange sadness. "Don't you see, Hastings? Elias Vane was not going to Venice to buy art. He was fleeing. He had nothing left. He must have sold everything, his clothes, his collection, just to buy the ticket and pay off his blackmailers. These trunks, they were dead weight. A disguise to make him look like a rich man, so the staff would treat him with respect." "A hollow man," I said, "traveling in a hollow box." "Precisely. And hollow men are easy to dispose of." Valmont closed the lid gently. He turned his attention to the rest of the car, moving toward the far end where the shadows were deepest. Behind a stack of wooden crates containing Italian wine, something blue lay crumpled on the floor. Valmont picked it up. It was a jacket. A conductor's uniform jacket with gold buttons and blue wool. "The skin of the ghost," Valmont said. "Madame Calvi was right. The killer wore this to walk the corridor, to be seen by sleepy eyes." He examined the garment closely. It was dusty, stained with grease on the sleeve. And then Valmont stopped. He held up the front of the jacket. "Look." The 3rd button from the top was missing. The threads were torn, hanging loose. "It was not unbuttoned," Valmont said. "It was ripped off. Violent force." Vane fought back, Hastings. In the silence of the tunnel, before the ether took him, he grabbed his attacker. "So the button is in Vane's coupe?" I asked. "Or," Valmont said, his eyes gleaming in the dim light. "It is in the pocket of the man who killed him. Or perhaps somewhere else." He patted the pockets of the discarded uniform. Empty. No ticket punch, no whistle. Just a faint smell. Valmont lifted the collar to his nose. "Ether?" I asked. "No," Valmont said. "That smell is gone. This smells of old paper and antiseptic and something else." He dropped the jacket. At that moment, the train gave a violent shudder and came to a grinding, screeching halt. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. The engine had stopped. We were stranded in the snow, somewhere between the mountains and the sea. "We have stopped," I said, stating the obvious. "Yes," Valmont said. "The stage is frozen. Now we must find the actor who is missing a button." He turned to the sliding door of the baggage car. He pushed it open a crack. Outside, a wall of white. The snow was falling straight down, thick and heavy. "Where is the body, Valmont?" I asked. "If it's not in the trunks and not in the room—" Valmont pointed to the floor of the baggage car, near the door. There were drag marks in the dust, faint, smeared, leading toward the edge. "He was heavy," Valmont said softly. "Dead weight. They brought him here, Hastings. Dressed in the conductor's uniform, the killer dragged Vane through the train while the passengers slept. And then—" He looked out into the white abyss. "They waited for a bridge. Or a ravine. And they lightened the load." "He's gone," I whispered. "Lost in the Alps." "The body is gone," Valmont corrected, turning back to the interior of the car. "But the man who threw him out is still trapped in this steel tube with us. And now he has nowhere to run." Valmont's face hardened. He looked less like a holidaymaker now, and more like a judge. "Come, Hastings. We are going back to the dining car. It is time to check the coats of our friends. I have a sudden desire to see if Dr. Thorne is missing any buttons." The train sat motionless in the snow, a steel island in a white ocean. The silence was absolute. The engine had ceased its breathing, and the only sound was the wind buffeting the glass, a low, mournful moaning that made the interior of the carriage feel even more like a tomb. We had returned to the scene of the crime, Coupe No. 7. The door hung askew on its splintered hinges. The cold from the unheated corridor was seeping in, turning our breath to mist. Valmont stood in the center of the small room, holding the discarded conductor's jacket we had found in the baggage car. He looked not at the empty bed, but at the lock of the door. "It is a beautiful trick, Hastings," he said quietly. "It is worthy of the stage. But like all magic tricks, it relies on the audience looking at the wrong hand." "I don't understand," I said, stamping my feet to keep the blood moving. "I saw him. Valmont." "I saw Elias Vane walk down that corridor. I saw him enter this room. I heard the bolt slide home. And yet, the room was empty." "You saw a man," Valmont corrected. "You saw a coat. You saw a hat. You saw a performance of terror." He threw the conductor's jacket onto the bed. "Think, Hastings. The man you saw, did he look at you?" I cast my mind back to the dim corridor, the swaying lights. "No, he looked down. He looked drunk or ill. He stumbled." "He stumbled because he was acting," Valmont said. "And he did not look at you because he was not Elias Vane." I stared at him. "An imposter?" "Consider the timeline," Valmont said, pacing the small space. Vane was terrified. He locked himself in. He would not have opened his door for anyone. And yet, Madame Calvi heard a struggle during the tunnel crossing, long before you saw Vane in the corridor. So Vane was already dead? "Dead, or deeply unconscious from the ether," Valmont said. "The man you saw entering this room was the killer. He had already disposed of Vane. likely stashing him temporarily in the neighboring coupe with the help of a terrified or complicit Madame Calvi. Then, to establish an alibi, he donned Vane's distinctive coat and hat. He walked the corridor, ensuring you, the honest witness, saw Vane return to his room safely. "But the lock," I insisted. "I heard him lock it from the inside." Click, clack, 2 turns. "Yes," Valmont said. "He entered. He locked the door. He sat in this room, smoked a cigar to calm his nerves, and waited." "Waited for what?" "For you to finish your cigarette and go back to sleep," Valmont said. "But you stayed. And Madame Calvi next door was watching through her crack. So he had to change his costume." Valmont picked up the conductor's jacket again. "He shed Vane's coat. He put on this uniform, which he must have stolen earlier or perhaps brought with him. Now he is no longer the victim. He is the staff. He opens the door, he steps out. But the door was locked from the inside when we broke it down," I argued. "The key was in the hole." "That," Valmont said, his eyes gleaming, "is the pièce de résistance." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, shining instrument. It was a pair of thin, surgical forceps, steel pincers with a long, slender nose. "Where did you get those?" I asked. "I borrowed them," Valmont said evasively, "from a medical bag I observed earlier. Now, watch." He moved to the broken door. He placed the brass key into the lock on the inside of the door. Then he stepped out into the corridor, pulling the door almost shut. "Imagine the door is intact," Valmont said. "I am the killer. I am dressed as the conductor. I step out. I close the door. The key is on the inside. How do I lock it?" He inserted the thin nose of the forceps into the keyhole from the corridor side. The steel tips gripped the end of the key stem that protruded inside. With a deft twist of his wrist, he turned the forceps. Click. Inside the room, the key turned. The bolt slid home. "Physics," Valmont whispered. Torque applied through a tunnel. He locked the door from the outside, leaving the key on the inside to create the illusion of a suicide or a ghost. He withdrew the forceps and turned to me. The demonstration was terrifyingly simple. "Isabella Calvi told us the truth," Valmont said. "She saw a conductor lock the door from the outside. She did not know she was watching the murderer seal the tomb." "So the killer is the conductor?" I asked. "No," Valmont said grimly. "The conductor is a tall man with broad shoulders. The jacket we found in the baggage car. Look at the size, Hastings. It is a medium. It would burst at the seams on our friend the conductor." "Then who?" Valmont looked toward the dining car, where the passengers were huddled together for warmth. "We are looking for a man who has access to surgical tools," he said. "A man whose hands are steady enough to turn a key with forceps in a moving train. A man who sat in the dining car and drank mineral water while his enemy fell apart." He pocketed the forceps. "Dr. Thorne," I breathed. "The silent doctor," Valmont agreed. "He did not operate on a patient last night, Hastings. He operated on a lock. And now, I think it is time we examined the patient." "But the button," I said, remembering the torn thread on the uniform. "If Thorne was wearing the jacket, then he is missing a button," Valmont finished. "Or if he is clever, he has hidden the jacket and returned to his own clothes. But he cannot hide the fact that he is the only man on this train who knows how to use steel to manipulate the human body and the mechanical soul of a door." He adjusted his scarf, preparing to leave the freezing coupe. "The train is stopped, Hastings. The stage is still. Let us go and deliver the final curtain call." The train shuddered. A deep, groaning vibration ran through the floorboards as the engine finally cleared the drift. Slowly, painfully, the Venetian Express began to move again. We were no longer in the high mountains. We were descending toward the sea, rolling onto the long, bleak causeway that connects the mainland to the islands of Venice. Outside, the white chaos of the storm had given way to a gray, watery dawn. The lagoon lay flat and leaden on either side of the tracks, a mirror for a sky that looked like wet ash. We were gathered in the dining car. It was the only room warm enough to inhabit. The passengers sat in a tense tableau. The industrialist, Mr. Grendel, nursing a coffee. Isabella Calvi, wrapped in furs, staring at her hands. And Dr. Thorne, who sat with his back to the window, cleaning his spectacles with a piece of silk. Valmont stood at the head of the aisle. He looked tired. The crispness of his collar had wilted, but his eyes were unblinking. "We are arriving," Valmont said softly. "Venice, the city of masks. It is fitting, is it not? For 12 hours this train has been wearing a mask. We have pretended to be asleep. We have pretended not to hear screams. We have pretended that a man can simply vanish into thin air." Mr. Grendel grunted. "The police will handle it in Venice. Why must we endure this speech?" "Because the police deal with bodies," Valmont replied, "and we have no body. We have only the truth, and the truth must be spoken before we disembark, or it will drown in the lagoon." He walked to the table where Dr. Thorne sat. The doctor did not look up. He continued to polish his lenses, round and round, a hypnotic, rhythmic motion. "It was a masterful operation, Doctor," Valmont said. "Clean, precise, surgical." Thorne stopped polishing. He held the glasses up to the light. "I do not practice anymore, Inspector. My hands shake." "Your hands shake when you try to save a life," Valmont said. "But last night, when you took one, I suspect they were steady as rock." Valmont reached into his pocket and placed 2 objects on the white tablecloth. The first was the pair of long steel surgical forceps. The second was a small, torn gold button. "The mechanics of the impossible," Valmont declared. "We found the door locked from the inside. A miracle. But with these," he tapped the forceps, "a man standing in the corridor can turn a key on the inside. It requires a surgeon's knowledge of anatomy, not of flesh, but of steel." Isabella Calvi gasped. "The conductor," she whispered. "The man I saw locking the door." "Was the doctor," Valmont finished. "Wearing a stolen uniform, a uniform I found in the baggage car. It was missing a button. This button." He pointed to the small gold disc. "I found this wedged in the lining of your medical bag, Doctor. It must have torn loose when you stripped off the jacket in the dark. A small error, a loose stitch." Thorne finally put his glasses on. His eyes, magnified behind the lenses, were cold and devoid of fear. He looked at the forceps. He looked at the button. He did not look at Valmont. "Elias Vane was a disease," Thorne said. His voice was calm, conversational, as if he were discussing a diagnosis. "You saw a collector. I saw a tumor." "He ruined you," Valmont stated. It was not a question. "He bought my clinic," Thorne said, staring at the gray water rushing past the window. "He stripped it. He sold the equipment. He turned a place of healing into a warehouse for his stolen art. He bankrupted me, Inspector. He took my reputation. He took my wife's respect. He left me with nothing but a trembling in my hands and a bottle of ether." "So you followed him." "I followed him," Thorne agreed. "I waited for the tunnel. I knew he was a coward. I knew he would bolt his door, but I also knew he would open it for a conductor." "And the body?" I asked, dreading the answer. Thorne took a sip of his mineral water. "The lagoon is deep, Captain. The Alps are deep. It does not matter. He is gone. I excised him." The train whistle blew, a long, mournful sound signaling our approach to the station. The dome of San Simeone Piccolo rose from the mist ahead, pale and ghostly. "You realize," Valmont said gently, "that the Italian police will be waiting. I have wired ahead." Thorne shrugged. He adjusted his cuffs. "I am tired of running, Inspector. I have finished my work. The patient is dead. The operation was a success. He looked at Valmont then, and for the first time he smiled. It was a terrible smile, filled with infinite relief. "You may arrest me," Thorne said, "but you cannot bring him back. And for that, I will sleep soundly tonight in any cell you choose." The train slowed. The noise of the wheels changed pitch as we slid into the cavernous station of Santa Lucia. The journey was over. The mystery was solved. But as I looked at the calm, broken man sitting across from us, I felt no triumph. I felt only the chill of the water outside and the heavy, crushing weight of a justice that had arrived too late to save anyone. "Come," Valmont said, standing up as the brakes hissed. "The curtain falls. Let us step out into the city of water." The Venetian Express came to rest with a final, weary exhalation of steam. The journey that had begun in the fog of Paris ended in the gray, watery light of Santa Lucia station. The doors slid open, but for a long moment no one moved. The spell of the sealed room had not yet broken. On the platform, the world was waiting. Two uniformed carabinieri, alerted by Valmont's wire from the border, stood like stone statues amidst the bustle of porters and greeting families. They looked cold, bored, and dangerous. Dr. Eris Thorne stood up. He buttoned his coat with hands that were, as Valmont had predicted, perfectly steady. He did not look back at the dining car, at the spilled wine, or at the passengers who stared at him with a mixture of horror and relief. He stepped down onto the concrete platform. Valmont and I followed. "Dottore Thorne?" one of the officers asked, stepping forward. Thorne nodded once. "I am he." There were no handcuffs, no shouting. It was a transaction, civilized and terrible. Thorne allowed himself to be flanked by the officers. As they led him away toward the water taxis, he paused and looked back at Valmont. "The snow is deep in the Simplon Pass," Thorne said softly. "It will be spring before they find him, if they ever do." "The truth does not require a body, doctor," Valmont replied, tipping his hat. "Only a conscience." Thorne smiled that same thin, terrible smile. "Then we are both satisfied." He turned and walked into the crowd, a gray man in a gray coat, vanishing as easily as the man he had killed. Valmont and I remained on the platform as the train emptied. The opera diva, Isabella Calvi, swept past us, her face hidden behind a veil, clutching her jewel case as if it contained her soul. The industrialist Grendel marched by, barking orders at a porter, already forgetting the night's terror in favor of the day's business. "It is over," I said, feeling the damp chill of the lagoon seep into my bones. "But it feels incomplete. Vane is gone. Thorne is gone. And we are left standing in the cold." Valmont turned to look at the Grand Canal, visible through the station doors. The water was a peculiar opaque green, lapping against the mossy steps of the city. "Incomplete?" Valmont mused. "Perhaps. But look at this city, Hastings. Venice is a place built on reflections. Palaces that float on rotting wood. Beauty that hides decay. It is the perfect resting place for this case." "Thorne was a victim in a way," I ventured. "Vane destroyed him." "We are all victims of our pasts, Hastings," Valmont said, adjusting his collar against the wind. "Thorne believed he was playing the role of the surgeon, cutting out a cancer. But in doing so, he became the disease. He murdered a defenseless man in the dark. That is not justice. That is merely revenge masquerading as duty." We walked out of the station and down the stone steps to the water's edge. A gondola drifted by, silent and black, like a hearse on the water. "And Elias Vane?" I asked. "What remains of him?" "Nothing," Valmont said. "He was a man who collected things. Art, secrets, enemies. In the end, he became part of a collection himself. The mountain has claimed him. He is just another shadow in the Alps. He stopped and looked at me, his dark eyes reflecting the somber sky. Do you know why I love trains, my friend? Why? Because they move, Valmont said. They leave the crime scene behind at 60 miles an hour. But here the water remembers everything. The train has released us, Hastings. We are free to be tourists again. Let us go find a coffee that does not taste of murder. He turned and walked toward the Vaporetto stop, his step light, his posture regained. But as I followed him, I looked back one last time at the blue steel carriages of the Venetian Express. It sat empty and silent on the tracks. The windows were dark. Coupe No. 7 was just another door in a long line of doors. But I knew that tonight, when the train turned around to make its return journey to Paris, the ghosts would still be riding. They would be sitting in the dark, smoking phantom cigars, listening to the rhythm of the wheels, waiting for the tunnel to swallow them whole. The water of the canal slapped against the stones. Click, clack, click, clack. I turned my collar up and followed Valmont into the city of masks. You have been listening to The Vanished Guest of the Venetian Express, a dark trace mystery. We traveled from the fog of Paris to the silence of the Alps and found that the strongest locks are the ones we build inside our own minds. Dr. Thorne believed he could excise his past with a scalpel, but he forgot that some stains cannot be washed out, only frozen. If this story kept you awake, or if you simply enjoy the sound of a mystery unfolding in the dark, please consider supporting the channel. Thank you for riding with us tonight. Until the next case, keep your doors locked, watch the shadows, and never trust a silence that feels too heavy.